Today, the American public gave a direct answer to a direct question. Yes, they believe Republicans are sabotaging the economy in order to defeat President Obama. In a new poll, 49% say Republicans are intentionally stalling efforts to jumpstart the economy to ensure Obama is not reelected. 50% of independents believe the same, that Republicans have sabotaged the economy for political gain. This is not a new idea, but it has not yet gotten the attention it deserves. Not too long ago, it was the ideal that dare not speak its name. You could accuse Republicans of a lot of things, the thinking went, but surely they would not intentionally sabotage the economy to keep President Obama from winning election, would they? Then came the infamous quote from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said this just before the midterm elections 2 years ago. The single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Senator McConnell caught so much flack for that, he tried to backpedal and said it was simply his chief political goal.
Our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term. Well, that is true. That's my single most important political goal, along with every active Republican in the country, but that's in 2012. Our biggest goal for this year is to get this country straightened out. Their storyline is that there must be some villain out there who's keeping this administration from succeeding.
They say Democrats want to create a villain, that it's not true that Republicans sabotaged the president. But then came the book from Robert Draper, detailing how the effort to block Obama began on the very night of his inauguration, with a bevy of Republican lawmakers like Congressman Eric Cantor and Congressman Paul Ryan, as well as the likes of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich and pollster Frank Luntz. But wait. Republicans cry foul. They say it's only their principal differences that led them to vote against the president again and again. But here's the catch. When Republicans vote against their own ideas, you know something stinks. When they were for it before they were against it. The Republican Party used to support infrastructure spending, but not when President Obama asks for it. More on that in a moment. Republicans used to allow deficit spending to get us out of recessions. They did it under their hero, Ronald Reagan. Under President George W. Bush alone, they allowed massive tax cuts, 2 wars, and Medicare Part D, all unpaid for, all of those items ballooning the deficit. Before President Obama, Republicans rarely voiced opposition to the Federal Reserve using monetary policy to help the economy. Under President Obama, the Federal Reserve Chief, Ben Bernanke, is called every name in the book. But you know Republicans are trying to sabotage the economy when they vote against tax cuts, as when they opposed extending the payroll tax cut benefiting middle-class Americans. Let's not forget that Republicans voted against the stimulus bill that was 40% tax cuts. Let's not forget that Republicans brought the country to the precipice of default for the first time in the history of our country over their refusal to extend the debt limit. And when bad economic news hits, as it did with last month's jobs report, they pounce.
You know, these job numbers are pathetic. And, you know, the American people really deserve better. And I think under the right leadership, we can do better.
If they would have taken our advice and worked with us, the economy would be better. More Americans would have better jobs. More Americans would have better incomes. That's clear to us.
This is very bad news for the American people, and the president is always quick to find someone to blame. First it was George Bush, and then it was Congress, ATM machines, Europe. He's always got someone. But the truth is, the job of the president is to get America back to work.
It all plays into the hands of the presumptive Republican nominee Mitt Romney, who has the audacity to ask the president to produce a jobs plan.
With 23 million people out of work, or stop looking for work, he hasn't put forward a plan to get us working again. Now, I know we're getting close to an election, so he'll come out with one soon. But 3.5 years later, we're waiting.
The intentional stalling continues to this day. The latest specific example is the transportation bill. This bill includes vital infrastructure spending and in years past would garner bipartisan support. These transportation bills are often passed in 5 or 6 increments, but a 2-year extension of the transportation bill is now dwindling to a possible 6-month extension. Republicans like to complain about uncertainty. This creates uncertainty and could cost tens of thousands of jobs. Senator Harry Reid accused Congressman Eric Cantor of trying to sabotage the economy by blocking an agreement on the transportation bill. a suggestion that was called bull, you know what, by a spokesman for Boehner. Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question: do you believe Republicans are deliberately trying to sabotage President Obama? Text A for yes, text B for no to 622-639, or go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com. I'll bring you the results later in the show. I'm joined by Norm Ornstein, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and Thomas Mann, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. They are co-authors of the remarkable new book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks: How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be with you.
Happy to be with you, Michael.
Thank you, sirs. Republicans intentionally stalling efforts to jumpstart the economy. Give us your view on this. We get a sense of what your book has been about, but give us a deeper insight into this conundrum.
Well, I would say, you're certainly right. If you look at the history of things that have been supported by Republicans in the past and the urgency of action now, and transportation, of course, it's the summer construction jobs in particular, a market that's really hurting badly. But there's another piece of evidence that I find quite disturbing, and that is a top Romney economic advisor, his top economic advisor, wrote an op-ed in a major German newspaper attacking Obama's economic policies and urging the Germans to pursue even more their policy of austerity. That's just not anything we've seen before, interfering abroad in the middle of a campaign, and it's really pretty troubling.
Yeah. Well, here's Bill Maher, a guest, talking about it recently.
Let's be honest. The Republicans are stalling every effort that he has tried to make to create jobs and help the economy.
I spoke to a senator earlier this week, and he told me that a Republican senator told me that Mitch McConnell has told his conference that we're not doing anything. We won't make a single move between now and the election because any move could be risky, and all of the is sliding down on President Obama.
Is this idea gaining traction, and does the poll reflect that, you think?
Oh, I think it's beginning to, although it's been perfectly clear since the beginning of the Obama administration that the minority Republicans saw their way back to power through the failure of President Obama, and that meant the failure of the economy. So I'm sure in their own minds they dignify it by saying we have this serious substantive differences and our program, our way, would have been more successful. But as your lead-in suggested, so many times they have moved away from positions that they have long supported once President Obama embraced it. Right. We have such powerful incentives for the minority party to take down the majority, whatever the consequences for the economy. And right now, Republicans are so persuaded by the righteousness and wisdom of their way and their leadership that they're prepared to do that.
Yeah, it's certainly to the detriment of the country. Here's the president talking about the Republican hypocrisy on the deficit. Let's take a listen.
It's like somebody goes to a restaurant, orders a big steak dinner, martini, all that stuff, and then, just as you're sitting down, they leave. And accuse you of running up the tab.
Even at Ruth's Chris. That's a good line, but the president really will have to press this case, won't he? He's not yet willing to accuse Republicans of deliberate sabotage. However, should he?
Well, one of the things that did work for him, you mentioned earlier the payroll tax cut. And you had, for a long time, Republicans in Congress resisting the idea of a tax cut for average Americans, even though they've all signed the Norquist Pledge, and that would in effect amount to a tax increase because it had been implemented before. Only when President Obama turned up the heat on this issue and it began to gain political traction did you see some change back. And the fact is, in so many of these areas where Republicans tried to block action or make it seem much, much worse by making it more acrimonious, as long as they could get away with it politically and not suffer, they could go ahead and do it blithely. You got to make it a little harder to make that work and put them more on the defensive. And I think that's what his rhetoric now in the use of the bully pulpit is aimed at doing, which he didn't do for much of the first 2 years.
Well, sure, that blithe indifference, though, has negative calculations or at least negative consequences for the rest of us out here trying to, get bills passed or in Congress or those who need the resources that those bills can make available. Do you have any doubt that if Mitt Romney were elected president, Republicans would find a way suddenly to pass basic things like, I don't know, infrastructure bills?
Oh, for sure. This is the bread and butter of members of Congress. It's absolutely essential for their constituents, those workers and business people who simply need an effective communication system in order to succeed in this country. We're so underinvesting now in the basics of a modern economy. There's no reason to oppose it. There's every reason to say we should do more now because of the high unemployment rate and the particular problems facing the construction industry. So
right.
No, I have no doubts that they will find a way to pass a transportation bill if they take the White House and both houses of Congress.
Well, quickly,
Michael,
Roland, I was going to ask you quickly before we leave. You jump in, but I want to ask you, too, what's the fallout from your book? I mean, here you are, a noted conservative, a thinker who's been self-critical in terms of what the Republicans, or especially the conservatives, have done. What's the fallout from all of that?
Well, keep in mind, I'm much more a raging moderate than a conservative. But,
right.
I'm taking flack, as Tom is, for coming out and basically saying we've got false equivalence here. And, we spent 40 years building reputations of being straightforward, calling it as we see it, not taking a partisan stance. We're still calling it as we see it, but we're using the political capital we built up because it's necessary and important right now. The country's facing big, big problems. And if you don't lay out where the blame is, then voters aren't going to know who to hold accountable and aren't going to do much about it.
Good enough. Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember to answer tonight's question there at the bottom of the screen. And share your thoughts on Twitter @EdShow. We want to know what you think. Coming up, the numbers don't lie, but they sure do hurt. See how the recession has gutted the middle class and why the Republicans aren't doing anything to stop it. You're watching The Ed Show on MSNBC.com. Stay tuned.